Hey, what's good, cannabis investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from August 19th to the 25th. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel, and of course, subscribe below if you want to tune in week after week. Now, try to think of these videos as a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place, so you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the U.S. cannabis industry, identify top U.S. MSOs that you keep seeing pop up that you think will be worth more in the future than they are now, based on their current market caps, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. But we love to recap this news out of Ohio already, as dispensaries ring up $38.4 million in cannabis sales in the first 12 days, putting them on pace for a $1.2 billion annual run rate in combined sales. So, of course, this is what happens when you end stupid cannabis prohibition. And overall, patients spent $38.4 million, $22.5 million in adult use, and $14.9 million in med in the first 12 days since the adult use market launched August 6th for those 21 and older. And so while it's still early, this annual run rate is shy of Missouri's more than $1.4 billion launch since they started in February 2023, though keep in mind Ohio is nearly double the population as Missouri, and so hopefully they'll pick up the pace, but the main thing is they've got about 125 dispensaries now selling adult use, and so of course if they turn that up, that'll likely increase the numbers. But at the same time, here's some breakdown of the prices and what people were buying in Ohio. And so another one from Axios Cleveland. Cannabis sales are high as a kite in Ohio, and we wouldn't have it any other way. This was to be expected. And lots of good info here as to why it matters so far after the first week. But notable, Ohio sales of rec cannabis are tracking ahead of sales during the first few weeks of legalization in Michigan and Illinois. Two very successful markets. Michigan actually the hottest one at the moment, and then Illinois could be much better if they just opened more stores and gave more equal access to opportunity. But take from that what you will. You can pause to read. Well, I wanted to bring you down to what companies are saying. Both foot traffic and net sales more than doubled on the first day of rec sales compared to the average day of this year, said a rep from Curaleaf. And then Air Wellness, which has 3 locations, said rec sales now make up 2/3 of the company's sales in the state. So definitely going to be a growth driver. It's just a matter of seeing how much over time. And with that, we got a green market report, but take it with a grain of salt, as I found a few errors or just instances of lazy reporting, but it's accurate for the most part, as U.S. cannabis sales jump in July for most states, which is to be expected because it's summer loving and people are having a blast. And so you can pause to read the text, but it's worth noting that I checked for Illinois' adult use sales numbers, and they're not out yet for July. So this is when they publish June's numbers. Around August 20th, you'd think they'd publish July's. It's the 24th, and they still haven't. So maybe next week they'll get to that and finally do their jobs. But interestingly enough, for Illinois, they put June's numbers, and then they say Illinois takes a familiar spot at number 3, with Headset estimating that the state logged $166 million in total sales for July. No doubt July will be up from June, but kind of silly to put a number in here that's not reflective of what you're actually trying to show. And so good to see progress though in other states as Americans want to vote for legal cannabis with their dollars. More sales in New York, 116 legal stores only, obviously open more of those, and sales will be better overall. But main thing is Florida's sales dipped in July to its lowest month in 2024. Did they though? I looked for Florida sales numbers, I couldn't find them, and it was saying Florida was not one of those, as Headset estimates. Again, these are estimates, so why even talk about it until the July numbers are out? But I digress. The sales in the state dipped in July, falling to 149 million sales. So if you find those numbers, put them in the comments, please. Otherwise, if I find them, I will share them too. But obviously, we did expect sales to be up in July. Well, from Todd Harrison, just sharing what we're expecting out of Florida, though, based on the big factor of Amendment 3 being on the ballot in November for Floridians to vote for legal cannabis. And if they end up passing that, that's a $5 billion market about to open up. And a lot of MSOs have great exposure in that state. And interestingly enough, it doesn't end in Florida, as Trulieve contributes another $5 million to the Rec Cannabis Initiative, putting some of their free cash flow to work in a good way, if you ask me. And so total amount put into the initiative for Amendment 3 has been $71.6 million so far. And as of right now, they've got $15.3 million unspent. And I think this is before the $5 million, though I could be wrong. And this is, again, probably in response to the hemp lobby or the anti-Amendment 3 initiative that is getting some funding, but obviously doesn't necessarily compete with the Amendment 3 initiative, which is a great thing for Floridians that obviously should have the right to vote for what they want to vote for as long as they put it on the ballot, which they've done. And so weird you've got a governor and many actors in the state trying to impede on those rights, but it is what it is. Links in the comments if you want to go through that. While timely reminder of how the American public feels about cannabis, and this is a breakdown of the results of the comments in response to when the DEA announced that they're going to reschedule cannabis to Schedule 3, and obviously outright descheduling would be the best thing. And it's great that the majority of Americans, or at least that left comments, understand that too. but also a good percentage of them understand that, well, we'll take what we can get because it's better than the status quo and nothing changing ultimately. And so hard to imagine this is not going to be an election issue when legitimately 9 out of 10 Americans, even in polls, support outright reform. And while polls are certainly not the most trustworthy source, just wanted to share this as more or less a breakdown of people that are in the know or understand the plant and see through the propaganda and the bullshit. Because we got this one from Gallup. Interesting, as Americans' views of cannabis effects worsen. And so who did they ask? I don't know. Probably not the most intelligent people, and probably not people that watch my channel and are aware of the new studies and the data, many of which we're about to go through in a moment. And so main thing, though, is that in a sense, they have worsened because a slim majority in the US now say cannabis negatively affects society and most users, which is interesting because I would just say they didn't ask the smartest people, because I've shown a lot of data in terms of studies out of states, economic studies or medical studies, highlighting that, if anything, cannabis reform is a major public health victory, let alone how much alcohol consumption is reduced. We've seen that in Canada, although they don't mention it's because of cannabis sales likely offsetting it. We know that's the case. And obviously, if there's less drinking, less possible drunk driving, less possible domestic violence or violence of any sort from drunken shenanigans, that's ultimately better for society. Now, I'll just shut up and show you what the data says, but apparently from 2022 to 2024, the views have gone down, and that seems silly to me, but that's what it says. So take from that what you will. Let me know in the comments, and you can pause to read more if you'd like, but there's one more thing I wanted to bring you down to, which is, again, the most important thing ultimately, and this is people that have tried it, and I think how their views or how their lack of experience with cannabis likely affects their views. But Americans believe cannabis less harmful than other substances, which it obviously is, so at least the public is aware of that. And what's just ironic is when you show this list, only one substance on here is in the Schedule 1 where it never belonged in the first place, and it's obviously the one that people have come to realize is the least harmful substance out of them all. And so, again, I'm a little bit iffy about what we saw at the top, especially when a lot of the new data from the last decade out of legal states says the exact opposite. So like any poll, take it with a grain of salt. It's not reflecting right or wrong, but just how a group of people felt in a certain moment when answering a question. But it does seem like maybe more and more Americans are using cannabis as a scapegoat to blame a lot of the ills of society on, when clearly, sadly, ignoring the reality of alcohol use going down, opioid overdoses going down, real estate values going up, jobs, local tax revenue, like all the benefits that ending prohibition obviously brings. So while people are misinformed, the good thing is we know, we're aware. All the links in the comments, you want to go through them. Well, from The Hill, this is an opinion piece from Paul Armentano, who I believe is the director at NORML. But thank you, The Hill, for sharing what's obviously true. As a decade into states legalizing cannabis, underage use has plummeted. Again, a benefit of ending prohibition that people seem to want to ignore, or just they're not aware of. Ultimately, that's what it is. But according to data provided by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, their latest National Survey on Drug Use and Health, while similarly data provided by Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Youth Risk Behavioral Survey, many different instances, another study published in JAMA, all finding the same results. And so try and tell me prohibition doesn't work. It clearly does, and I mean, the data's there, otherwise you're just lying to yourself. Well, from ACS Publications, August 14th, bidirectional effect of long-term delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol treatment on mTOR activity and metabolome. So it's a bit technical, but I'll do my best to break it down. As the activity of mechanistic target of rapamycin, mTOR, has a major impact on aging by regulating cellular metabolism. Okay, sounds like if we can increase mTOR, be more beneficial and keep us looking younger. So what they found in the brain, delta-9 THC treatment induced a transient increase in mTOR activity and in the levels of amino acids and metabolites involved in energy production. Fascinating. Followed by an increased synthesis of synaptic proteins. Unexpectedly, we found a similar reduction in the mTOR activity in adipose tissue and in the level of amino acids and carbohydrate metabolites in blood plasma as in animals on a low-calorie diet. And so deschedule cannabis already, study this in humans, and see if we can get the same damn results, because this sounds very promising and helpful for people that don't want to look too old too quickly, right? While that study, also important to note that it focused on delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the THC that comes from the medicinal cannabis plant that we have so many studies for. This was an interesting one out of PubMed because it looked at the derived delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol exposures reported to U.S. poison centers, and this is, from my understanding, the gas station skunkweed that I've never tried, but that's prevalent in the U.S. Variations among U.S. states and regions and associations with public policy as of August 21st, so it's fairly fresh. And so results, you can pause to read most of it, but the conclusions. The rate of delta-8 THC exposure reported to U.S. poison centers increased by 79% from 2021 to 2022. Again, not necessarily from the medicinal products we get out of dispensaries, but from the gas station skunk stuff. With the U.S. South accounting for more than 2/3 of exposure, the rate of Delta-8 THC exposure reported to poison centers was significantly lower among states where Delta-8 THC was banned and among states where cannabis use was legal. So that's a big factor to consider there, highlighting that where it's legal for adult use, you have less of this garbage weed impersonating it. And so obviously, well, they say consistent regulation should be adopted. Ending or just fucking outright deschedule should be adopted so that we can study and learn more about this miracle plant, no doubt. But more studies moving along. Science Direct from the future, October 2024. Prenatal broad spectrum cannabidiol administration prevents an autism-like phenotype in male offspring from a maternal stress terbutaline rat model. And again, what is the point of studying this stuff on animals when we can study it on humans? It's never killed a single human being. So wasting so much time. Anyways, just the highlights for you. CBD was tested in preventing autistic-like behaviors produced by neuroinflammation. Fascinating. Let's get this studied in humans. CBD prevented an overall autistic-like phenotype from developing in male rats, and CBD may be an appropriate complementary prenatal neuroinflammatory preventative. Fascinating. So more here if you wanted to pause to read. Of course, all the links will be in the comments if you wanted to deeper dive through them. From Taylor and Francis online, very interesting. Suicidal ideation in medicinal cannabis patients, a 12-month prospective study. And if you claim to value human life in any sort of way, you ought to value the results of this study and give this miracle plant a chance. So you can pause to read the objective method and results, but main thing to highlight the conclusions, as suicidal ideation is common among individuals seeking cannabis-based medicinal products, or just the cannabis plant that does its magic, to treat a range of chronic conditions, and is associated with higher levels of depressed mood and poor quality of life. And I believe this is referring to suicidal ideation, not the cannabis plant, as treatment with cannabis-based medical products reduce the prevalence and intensity of suicidal ideation. And so if prohibitionists want to keep lying through their teeth, fair enough. Let them be the scumbag frauds that they are, but this doesn't lie. Better to have cannabis accessible to people that might be suicidal so that the prevalence and the intensity of that ideation might be lessened and we can save some lives in the long run. Well, from Frontiers, review article, so a summary of other studies in the past, but CBD, a plant-derived compound that we have a ton of data on at this point, reviewing what we know about it and why it ought to be widespread and used more often as a medicine. So more here if you wanted to pause to read all of the details, but overall, oral doses of this much or vaporized doses of this much were shown to be effective at treating anxiety and cognition. Conversely, results that did not have a significant effect on treating cognitive impairments can be explained by various factors such as also taking THC or other abuse drugs masking effect, low dose or unknown purity of the CBD. So of course, tested safe product from legal outlets is better than buying it from some random person. Lastly, CBD showed a safe profile with scarce or no serious adverse events and no drug addiction behavior. Because at least the legal outlets have an incentive to want to get your money because they're hopefully making profit and continuing their business over time. But conclusions, telling us what we already know, we ought to deschedule cannabis, so especially we can look at CBD and THC and then all the other compounds that we find within as well. But with that, another one from SpringerLink, cannabis use in endometriosis, the patients have their say in online survey for German-speaking countries from August 9th. You can pause to read the purpose and methods. But main thing results in conclusions. Out of 912 participants who provided valid answers, 114 reported using cannabis for self-management. Cannabis was rated as the most effective self-management strategy to reduce symptom intensity, 7.6 out of 10. Additionally, 90% of the participants were able to decrease their pain medication intake. So they used cannabis to replace something else that likely did not serve their body as well overall in the long run. And the greatest improvement was observed in sleep, 91%, menstrual pain, 90%, and non-cyclic pain, 80%. And apart from increased fatigue, 17%, side effects were infrequent. And so hopefully the side effects maybe came and went and were not as consistent as these other positive results. But hey, yeah, we know cannabis is a miracle medicine. We want it outright descheduled, but we'll take Schedule 3 in the near term. Well, they're interesting one, but more data that we already know. This isn't new news, but people who use cannabis are less likely to be obese. Move out of the way, Ozempic, new study shows. And so I was hesitant to share this, though, just because it's copy and pasted from Marijuana Moment. Good thing I don't need to use their site and give them the chance to make any sort of money. I'm basically just giving you the juice without all the fucking annoying ads. But the other thing that Weed Karen Tom Engel did this time that really annoyed me is that he did not put the link to the original study in here at all. And so I couldn't just pull that up and share that with you. He did put a study from 2016 to 2022 highlighting similar results, but for whatever reason, he did not link the new study. So shame on you, Tom. But What does the study find? The analysis showed a dose-response relationship between cannabis use and body mass index. With the lower the BMI classification, the higher the cannabis use. So people who use cannabis within the past month were 31% less likely to be obese than non-users. After adjustment, the study says, while daily cannabis users are 32% less likely to be obese than non-users. As legalization and prevalence of the drug in the U.S. increases, another benefit to public health that we wouldn't have thought, the prevalence of obesity may decline. Let's hope so, especially as alcohol use goes down as well. But fascinating, ain't it? You can pause to read or grab the full link in the comments to go through that one. But lastly, from NORML, an interesting analysis that found THC blood concentrations not correlated with impairment. And so take from that what you will. I definitely think stoned driving is different than drunk driving, and that debate should be allowed to be had. Not saying I condone it, but it is what it is. And we got more data that tells us at least the presence of THC in blood is poorly correlated with behavioral impairment, according to data published in the Forensic Science International. And so I'll put that raw study in the comments if you want to go through that. But a cohort of over 15,000 individuals, fairly large, consistent with prior literature, the correlation between drug concentration was high for ethanol in the sense that high ethanol concentration correlated directly with poor motor abilities and weakened driving abilities, but it seemed low for THC. Specifically, authors determined for THC, the mean drug concentrations changed little between drivers assessed as not impaired and impaired. So whether you were stone driving or sober, it seemed like it had very little effect. So take from that what you will. Fascinating studies. Let me know what you think in the comments. But with that, some updates out of the cannabis investing world. And so for those of you that watched my video last week, we got a drop from the Marijuana Herald from this guy. Apparently this is Anthony Martinelli. I'm sure many did not expect the individual that had an accurate DEA source and to correctly front run the news of rescheduling earlier this year to look like this. Who gives a fuck what the guy looks like ultimately if what he's saying has substance, right? And so only time will tell, but this is a clip from a longer interview with POW Group learning about Anthony Martinelli, his background, rescheduling, election, and more. And so you can watch the whole thing. It's kind of boring, but main thing is I think this takeaway is him talking about the source earlier this year being the same source coming back to him and how he ended up writing the article we got last week saying that we're going to get this by October, whether that means the beginning of October, end of October. I don't know. But.
So with this individual, I actually first made a connection with them, I would say about a decade ago when I worked for a cannabis website. And then it was years later after I, actually earlier this year that he recontacted me. Essentially was like, hey, do you remember me? And then had this information. And I was like, okay, well, I was a little bit hesitant. I actually met with the individual online Zoom. I actually had them through a Snapchat conversation, show me their ID, their DEA.
Imagine a DEA source or DEA agent using Snapchat.
DEA credentials. I verified that the name was the same, and then I verified that it was the same person I spoke with years ago. And then that's when I ended up publishing the story. I felt that I had enough information to do so.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I mean, you were credible once this year, and so as of right now, you are credible until you prove us otherwise. And so let's hope that we get the good news that you're claiming we're going to get sooner than later. Speaking of big announcements, it's not really cannabis related, though it could have a big impact down the line if a lot of dominoes go our way. Say the Republicans take the cannabis baton from the Dems and throw it back in their faces, giving them a better chance at winning the election. And then if Trump actually does win the election and RFK joins them, it's worth remembering that RFK is pro-ending cannabis prohibition at the federal level and providing equal access to medicine, especially because he wants to lessen the chokehold that Big Pharma has on the medical industry. But all that to say, worth giving a listen, because I don't think anything will unite the American people faster than telling them the truth and what they've wanted to hear after being lied to for so long, and having the balls to put the blame exactly where it belongs on the establishments that's doing everything in their power to keep you sick and unhealthy, to funnel as much money out of your pockets with wasteful spending, and then at the same time try and manufacture consent year after year with bullshit after bullshit to try and take more and more of your rights away. And so whether he's helpful for cannabis or not, only time will tell. But again, if you wanted the basic American principles of, freedom of God, freedom of family, freedom of markets, freedom of community, I don't think there's any clearer path towards that than what he's standing for, at least going forward. But with that, from Winnie A, interesting article with a lot of good information on the rescheduling process, worthy of a full read, but here are some highlights. And so the main thing we're asking, is there going to be one of those hearings that could delay the rescheduling process? Well, we're now a month and a half, give or take, past the initial deadline to even request a hearing. So I think it is interesting, but not necessarily noteworthy, that a hearing hasn't been noticed yet. Makes me think it's not going to come. Now, there's no set time, though, like after a certain number of weeks or months where the DEA is required to put out a notice for hearing. But if one hasn't been requested, what are the chances? While at the same time, we're hearing from other sources that this should be finalized end of September or in October. And so I don't necessarily know who's right, but I'm trying to show you as much so that you can paint a picture and decide for yourselves and plan accordingly for your own situation, right? So take from that what you will, but I'll put this link in the comments if you wanted to go through that. Well, thanks Todd Harrison for sharing what Bloomberg Intelligence has to say on U.S. cannabis, citing, we calculate tax relief for the 5 leading U.S. Canna MSOs may, or trim, just learned a new word there, their combined tax liability by $500 million in 2025 when Section 280E is repealed. Now, the real question is, how quickly will Section 280E be repealed once rescheduling to Schedule 3 is finalized? Hopefully it doesn't take forever, but that would lift the earnings per share to positive 27 cents a share, making these companies extremely attractive versus analysts' current expectations of negative 2 cents a share. So take from that what you will. But yeah, 280E going away is the best possible thing we could all hope for as investors in this industry. Well, sharing this from Reed Street 420, short interest on MSOS is down to a new 52-week low, which is nice to see. Now, unfortunately, it is past August 15th, but there's no update for mid-month of the current month, which I did look for on fintel.io, but I could not find it. Anyways, this link will be in the comments along with it, but happy to share that at least short interest has gone down to 11.8 million shares outstanding, the lowest it's been literally since August of 2023, essentially. Wow, that would be when the news broke that HHS admits cannabis is a medicine with their 252-page report. So nice to be back there after a long ways away from it. This podcast from the Cannabis Investing Network that I wanted to share as they look at the Q2 2024 financial review of the Big 5 MSOs featuring Cannavestments, the guy that I share the deeper dives of for all the quarterly earnings. So thanks, Nick, for what you do. If you've watched my videos, you're obviously aware of what he thinks about these companies and you've probably seen what he's done. But basically, if you just wanted to tune in for a few hours and get another recap so it's fresh off the dome, definitely a good resource. I've not listened to this yet, but I do plan to listen to it later today. But with that, on to MSO news, as it's official. VRNO announces closing of acquisition of the Arizona and Virginia subsidiaries of the Cannabis Co., becomes exclusive cannabis operator for HSA5 in Eastern Virginia, and strengthens Arizona footprint. And so while it might be good for them now, it will be better when Virginia eventually launches a commercial adult use market. But this helps VRNO expand their footprint to 14 states, 15 cultivation and production facilities, and 150 dispensaries nationwide. So if you're interested in VRNO or an existing shareholder, more here if you wanted to pause to read on their commentary. The other reason I'm very happy to be reminded of as a cannabis investor is that of the 105 million they're getting, 40 million is in Class A subordinate voting shares. And so investing in cannabis shares is essentially an investment in VRNO as well. So if VRNO does well, cannabis likely will too, and the future is very bright for all these companies to do very well as new markets turn on and 280 goes away once and for all. While the cannabis company announces definitive agreements for Florida assets, leading multi-state operator to acquire one cultivation facility, a joint venture between Mint Cannabis and Shango to acquire all 14 cannabis dispensaries in market and 2 cultivation and manufacturing facilities. Total consideration is just $16.4 million. That seems so cheap. So it seems very unfortunate that even after closing Virginia and Arizona in that deal with VRNO, that they didn't want to try to hold on to this for a bit longer. But again, if it's costing them money, fair enough. They're obviously doing something that's going to likely keep them money and not cost them what it was. The cannabis company will retain one MMT license that I'm sure they're going to hold on to maybe for adult use times when it'll be a lot more valuable. But for anyone interested, these are all the details. Lakeland transaction highlights, Mint Shango transaction highlights, the breakdown. So for anyone interested, all the links or all the details here, while links are in the comments. While Air Cannabis expands retail footprint in Florida with 2 new dispensaries. So good to see them continuing to focus on what they can control and getting their presence up to 66 locations in that med-only state that is going to be a firecracker of an adult use market. So if you're interested in Air Wellness as a shareholder, happy to see them focusing on what they can control, expanding while it's cheap to do so. Some more here if you wanted to pause to read. While another one from them opening a new dispensary in Manchester, Connecticut. So that's the company's first retail location in the state, opened in partnership with local attorney Tiana Hercules, interesting, featuring a drive-through and in-store shopping for cannabis customers. And so I did not know that they were in Connecticut, probably because they weren't until now, but it seems like they're going to try that market out, and I wish them best of luck there. So anyone interested in learning more about what they're doing in Connecticut, you can pause to read or grab the link. While last one, Trulieve to open medical cannabis dispensary in Orlando, Florida. Trulieve also doesn't stop. So they're obviously happy to prepare for November and get as many locations up and running smoothly as possible before we get some new big news for the cannabis industry. Well, last few stories to share just out of the business of cannabis. New York's legal cannabis sales pass $500 million mark as crackdown on illicit market continues. good for them. Obviously, they shot themselves in the foot for 3 years and they could have been so much further along, and they're happy to share that they're making some progress as they're opening more legal outlets a month, and that's making overall sales go up a month, right? More tax dollars a month, more jobs, bigger market, yada yada, all this good stuff that we know happens when you end prohibition. But we got to focus on one thing that a lot of these blue states wanted to make happen, but you can't make fetch happen, and that is social equity. Because while New York is seeing more stores open, hundreds of New York CAURD shops still trying to open, and these were the ones harmed by the war on drugs, promised to get first access. Didn't seem to go that way. Proximity protection and funding remain two critical hurdles for these social equity permit holders that New York deems special, right? There are still at least 300 more justice-involved conditional adult use retail dispensary permit holders trying to get open. Noted Jason Tantalo is one of these license holders. And basically the two hurdles have proven immense, Tantalo says, particularly the proximity protection, since there's a lag between when CAURDs request a legal notice from the OCM saying that their site can move forward and when that protection is actually granted. So it is the regulatory body of the OCM that is fucking over all the people they told that would get first dibs and equal access to opportunity. So fascinating, right? And he said only 90% of the legal dispensaries open thus far are among the 463 CAUD permits issued last year. Now that's honestly better than I was expecting based on, what to be expected out of any social equity experiment. But hey, take from that what you will. Social equity is not good for anyone, not good for business, and certainly only a political ploy. Well, from Green Market Report, despite governor's report, most Illinois social equity businesses not operational yet. So same thing we're seeing out of New York, same thing we're seeing out of Illinois. A raft of issues have prevented social equity owners from opening, with lack of investment being the largest issue in Illinois. Ironic when the governor's touting that the program is a possible national standard, when in reality everyone's cringing, calling it a failed launch, when less than half of the social equity permits issued are even operational, and many of them may go unused altogether. You can't make this shit up. It's just lip service to try and get dumb people to vote for them. It sucks that people actually even fall for it. But out of all the possible licenses issued from the department data, there are just 199 out of 504 that are operational. That's 39%. It's pretty pathetic. And the breakdown includes 111 retailers when there should be 199 as of July 26. And we were hoping for those 200 new stores to come online to help drive legal sales. Sadly, we only got a little more than half of that, while looking at growers, infusers, and transporters. And so with only 221 total dispensaries, you can only sell so much cannabis. And of course, we want to see more stores open to sell more legal product to offset the black market. But yeah, the reality too is when they're purposely using data from January of 2023 and not using up-to-date data from 2024 in their report to make it look better, that's called fraud. So the reality that many licensees have faced major hurdles raising the millions of dollars that they've needed, Insider said. As a result, plenty either sold their permits to larger corporations because they have no choice because they've been hung out to dry by the regulators or haven't done anything yet with their licenses. And that's an even bigger problem. If you haven't done anything with it, well, that's on you, man. That's going to suck. And so investment disincentive, right? Less reason for people to want to invest because it's organized so poorly. The taxes are so high. Well, your weekly reminder that anything equity is bullshit, used by criminals playing identity politics to trick naive people into voting them, promising and then never delivering. And sadly, I'm sure they all made money in the process. But from Travis Haynes reminding us where we're at, how far we've come, and why the future looks very, very bright. And so this, I forget exactly where it came from, but this is from Something and Associates. So it's from a law publication highlighting what they knew at the time being a possible timeline for rescheduling. And what's fascinating is that in line with what Grok has said, and in line with what now this source who was correct in January has said, that cannabis is set to be rescheduled by October. While it does seem too good to be true, it is also right on schedule with whoever wrote this with the best information they had at the time. Final rule September 20th, making it effective October 20th? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. All I know is I've put my money where my mouth is, and I'm planning ahead for a bright future, and I hope you are too. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you next week for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.